A warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. In segment number 2, we're going to be chatting with one of our good friends, Curtis Rogers. He does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports. We're going to be talking a little bit about the WCC, what we can expect out of Gonzaga. As I did just do my WCC Conference Preview Edition a few days ago. I think that Gonzaga's in for a relatively good year. They've got a lot of guys that, as I always like to say, are out of sight, out of mind. So they're going to be a lot of fun. We're going to take a look at the Big Ten landscape, what to expect out of those West Coast teams in terms of the Big Ten as well, how they're going to acclimate to the travel and so much more. So you have a great chat there. And then in segment number 1, we finally found out why Wofford made a stunning coaching change last week. And I've got some thoughts, and Wofford might not be fielding a team this year. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We've got a lot to unpack there in about a minute or two. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that front. As if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they make sure that you have access to your funds for sports betting whenever and wherever. That 100% of gambling transactions, they do indeed get approved when you go to edgeboost.bet. Utilize that promo code of Greg, Greg. That'll give you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25, and you earn cashback rewards when you utilize EdgeBoost as well. And we've got a lot to talk about with regards to this Wofford situation. As Dwight Perry was canned on September 12th, a lot of people were very confused by that. Tyser Anderson is currently the associate head coach, has been elevated in the absence of Perry, and the entire Wofford team apparently wants him reinstated. 12 of the 15 players, according to some news outlets out there in the Carolinas, are reporting that Wofford might just not field a team and they might just boycott the season. Everyone is right now threatening to enter into the transfer portal. And here's why Dwight Perry was fired, and nobody knew why. Impermissible benefits, to where guys were using their meal plan off campus for about $84 to $108. In the day and age where we've got NIL and guys making millions of dollars, we've got Wofford canning their coach and guys getting suspended indefinitely by the NCAA because they use their meal plan off campus for less than $125. What are we doing here? Like, seriously, what are we doing here? And if you're looking at Wofford for the upcoming season, you have to have all sorts of question marks, because how do you handicap a team that might not have a team this year? Like, that's something to take a look at. I thought that Wofford was going to be a pretty rock-solid team this year, and a SoCon that felt like Furman was going to be number one, and then the rest, it was going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge out there. And I actually just did my conference preview for the SoCon a few weeks ago, and with regards to Wofford, I did put them towards the top in terms of my projector finish. I couldn't ride with them at number 1, but I put them number 2. Like, I legitimately think that Wofford is in for a really good season, but everyone is threatening to walk out on the team. I have not seen who is the suspended players as of right now for Wofford. I've been trying to see who they are. I have yet to be able to find them, but these guys, they were utilizing their meal plans off campus. Right now, Wofford is in danger of not having a team, and that's just some of what you get here in the month of September. Like, we've been talking a lot about the St. Joe's situation with the fact that now you've got Steve Donahue as their coach. You sometimes have these guys that they bolt at the last second, and you're always going to get a few coaching changes throughout the month of September and October, and typically these teams have done relatively well. Like, if you remember the Greg Marshall situation a few years ago over at Wichita State canned him like days/weeks before the start of the season. They actually still ended up making the NCAA tournament. Typically, in the case of St. Joe's, you're able to keep alive your team together. In this case, everyone at Wofford is just, we're going to use a tame term, cheesed off at the situation, because they are using impermissible benefits, eating maybe cheese, who knows, but these guys are very, very upset at the entire situation, and very rightfully so. So you might not be getting a team out of Wofford this year. Dwight Perry is right now canned, but they're right now fighting to get him reinstated, and we shall see what is going to be happening there, as the season is supposed to tip off actually in Rock Hill, South Carolina. That is actually going to be a Winthrop game, but the season actually starts in the home state of Wofford, so we've got a lot to unpack there, and man, this is just a very, very interesting situation. I'm sure that we're going to be getting more on it in the next next few days. Prior to doing my chat with Curtis Rogers, I was unaware that he was canned for impermissible benefits. That's something that I'm going to be talking about over the next few days on this podcast as this story develops, but certainly worth taking a look at. But what else is worth taking a look at is the Big Ten landscape, how Gonzaga and the WCC are going to be doing, and so much more. We're going to be chatting about that with Curtis Rogers of 710 Seattle Sports on the Flip Side Radio on Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always great to be joined by this man as we've got Curtis Rogers aboard. He does such an incredible job. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He really does a little bit of everything over there at 710 Seattle Sports. He is the pre- and post-game host for the Seattle Mariners. He's doing a great job following the Seattle Seahawks, Seattle Kraken, just anything out there in the Pacific Northwest. He does an incredible job, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X and Instagram at A Kid From Kent altogether. And Curtis, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, thanks for having me on. Yeah, we're getting ever so close to the start of college basketball season. The portal's closed. Everybody's back on campus now, getting set for the non-conference. I'm super excited for the year that is coming up. And if it's anything like the NCAA tournament that we had this last year, it's going to be just an incredible season that awaits us.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that Gonzaga is going to be one of the most interesting teams in all of college basketball, because something I was to look at coming into the season is these teams with a lot of guys that I always like to call out of sight, out of mind. And they've got a lot of those guys because, like, Jalen Worley did not play last year. The man of steel, Steel Venters, he's been out the last 2 seasons. And with Gonzaga, I think that those are upside guys. Braden Smith is a very, very big rarity. He was a redshirt last season, and for Gonzaga, bringing back Graham Ike, I think it's just so big for them as well, and I think that this could be the year that they were hoping that they would have last year, might actually turn out to be this year.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to see what Gonzaga could do this year, and you mentioned how expectations were sky high for them in 2024, 2025, considering all that they brought back from the year prior. You had Nembhard back, all sorts of talent up and down that roster. And they fell short, I think, of where a lot of people thought they were going to be, especially after the start that they got off to this last year with so many great players on that roster. It was kind of weird to see Gonzaga fall that far short of expectations. Yeah, maybe they do kind of regroup. You mentioned the guys that they do get to have on their roster this year. Maybe we see a potential Braden Smith showdown in the NCAA tournament at some point with Gonzaga taking on Purdue. That would be so fun to watch. But you mentioned Steel Venters. I mean, obviously the veteran presence that he would be in that lineup. Who knows what he's going to look like a couple years removed, but I do think bringing back Graham Ike is going to be huge. I think he's going to be one of the best big men in the country, potential All-American candidate too. So I think what Gonzaga is able to do this season, it's going to be very much hinging upon how much their veteran guys can take them, especially because they've got, it's a younger looking team, especially after having such a veteran-laden backcourt over the last few years. Guys like Nembhard, Julian Strother, Nolan Hickman, they're not there anymore. And this Gonzaga team, even in the WCC, which is going to be their final run of it in that conference this year, I think they're definitely going to be one of the 2 favorites. Devin St. Mary's, obviously. I'm looking forward to this Gonzaga season, maybe because it is sort of their last opportunity to kind of quiet the critics that say the WCC isn't all that it's cracked up to be. I think it's going to be a good year for them. And especially, I mean, you look at their conference schedule too, they have some pretty quality opponents as well, but none that I would say are in the mix right now for a national championship. They do have the tournament in Las Vegas. It's the Players Era Festival that can get pretty interesting for them. So I kind of wonder if maybe they're going to be able to stack a few more wins in the non-conference, something they were unable to do last year when kind of felt like every big game they had outside of that Baylor game, they ended up losing.
Yes, absolutely. And for this Gonzaga bunch, I do think that could be a little bit of a breakthrough for them as well in the non-conference, because it might not be quite as loaded as a slate as they've had in the past, but we always know that Gonzaga is not going to shy away from the competition because the WCC just isn't quite the conference that a lot of teams like a Gonzaga would typically be playing in, but I just feel like there's a little bit of upside with the WCC as well. I just did my conference preview for the conference a week ago. A team like San Francisco, I feel like has a lot of upside. St. Mary's loses a lot of pieces from a season ago, but they're still St. Mary's, coached by Randy Bennett. A team like Santa Clara has been able to form themselves as a top 4, top 5 team in the conference. And then out there in your neck of the woods, Seattle has a lot coming back for a mid-major as well. I feel like they were a quality add for the conference as well. And I feel like even though the WCC is certainly not going to be on par with like a power conference or anything like that, it feels like it's a little bit improved up and down the boulevard this season.
I get that vibe too. I think it's going to be a conference right now that is one where it may not necessarily have the high-end talent that it's had in years past, but I think it's definitely going to be a multi-bid league in the NCAA tournament. How many beyond sort of the requisite 2 that they normally get in Gonzaga and St. Mary's remains to be seen, but I just really like what this conference does year in and year out. Even though people kind of poo-poo it, I still think they're potentially, there's a lot of quality basketball that could be played in the WCC. Like you mentioned, San Francisco, they added Mookie Cook from Oregon, Guillermo Diaz from Pitt. I think that's going to be a couple of nice additions to them, especially Mookie Cook, who was a former 5-star recruit to Oregon. Obviously didn't live up to the billing that he had in high school, but still talented nonetheless. And we've seen the WCC kind of be a nice landing ground for guys like that in years past. Arizona's had a couple of guys transfer away from their program and find success in the WCC. Adama Ball with Santa Clara, Paulius Morauskas with St. Mary's. So it has been a nice spot for guys to kind of get that second run potentially. I know that Seattle U could potentially have a really fun season, especially we talk about transfers. How about picking up former Gonzaga forward Untitled Chapter, who had played for at least a year in Spokane? That's going to be an interesting name to watch, especially if Seattle U kind of makes that rise up to the WCC. It'll be interesting to see what kind of crowds Seattle U gets this year. Their gym is so tiny, but they're going to be playing in a much more quality conference. It's going to be fun to watch. And then obviously you've got Wazoo, you've got Oregon State, kind of wild cards in that bunch. Washington State has lost so much talent over the last couple of years. It'll be interesting to see what David Riley is able to do in year 2 in Pullman. So I think the WCC still has plenty of intrigue outside of the teams that we all pay attention to in Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And the Dons of San Francisco always have been sort of that number 3 team, even when they had a few different coaches. Kyle Smith has went through there. Todd Golden was coaching there not too long ago, and that guy just won a national championship. So they've been able to do a great job on that front, and a man that does a great job on so many different fronts is Curtis Rogers, joining me right here on Cusco Soups. And then also in your neck of the woods is another team I think has so much upside in Washington, because last year it was pretty much a one-man band for them where you had great Osabor and not much else. But I think that Danny Sprinkle, after having pretty much the first bad season of his coaching career, is going to be able to bounce back with a roster that I just take a look at it, and it's much deeper than it was a season ago. I think that the Washington Huskies just learned from the, shall we say, pitfalls of a season ago, giving a whole bunch of money to one guy. Now you've got a pair of guys that come in from USC and Wesley Yates and Desmond Claude, and Yates actually began his career over at Washington. Jacob Agansevich, who he comes on over from Lipscomb, born in the great state of Wisconsin. He should be rock solid, and with bringing back the likes of a Zoom Diallo and Frank Kepedog, they've got some returning talent as well, and I just feel like this is a deep roster that I think is going to surprise a lot of people out there in the Big Ten.
I think so too. I think they have among the higher upsides of teams that finished in the bottom half of the Big Ten last year. I look at Washington right now, and also who they brought in. I look at Wesley Yates, who was very good with USC a year ago. And then sort of the wild card, I would say, of all their new players is going to be Hannes Steinbeck, the German forward, coming over from Europe. Had a really good showing at the under-20 World Championships, FIBA World Championships with Germany. I thought he looked really good, kind of wowed. I think a lot of people kind of wonder if maybe he's a potential one-and-done kind of player from Washington, which would be an incredible find for Danny Sprinkle. I think Washington's ceiling is much higher than it was a year ago, which not to discredit Danny Sprinkle, but it felt like last year's ceiling was maybe at best an NIT team. Obviously, that did not happen, but I think they've got a really good foundation this year, and I think they could definitely be in the middle to maybe upper half of the Big Ten this year, which I think is good enough for an NCAA tournament berth. I think this conference is deeper than it was a year ago, which is a good thing for all the schools in the Big Ten. I really think the Huskies are going to have probably their most interesting season since probably, year 2 of Mike Hopkins when they went to the NCAA tournament, won a Pac-12 regular season title. I'm not saying that is going to be happening with Washington, but I think this is a big year for momentum with the program. Year 2 under Danny Sprinkle, you want to see some more results. And also they're opening up their first ever basketball only facility in the next couple of years. So some good momentum towards that. I think will go a long way here in the 25-26 season.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that things are going to be very good for Washington moving forward, and I just feel bullish about the West Coast teams in the Big Ten in general because Oregon, they just still have a guy that knows how to coach in Dana Altman. He was one of the OGs of the transfer portal. I think that USC, year number 2 under Eric Musselman, is going to be a little bit cleaner than it was in year number 1. Actually retained a guy in Terrence Williams as well. You don't see that very often with an Eric Musselman coach team, but I mean, those two teams are rock solid. And then UCLA, because everyone's talking about Purdue and Michigan in the Big Ten, and rightfully so. I think that those are the top 2 teams in the conference, but bringing back Sky Clark and Eric Daly from a season ago, pairing them up with Donovan Dent and Xavier Booker, I really look at this team, and I think that there's a lot of upside with this team, and I feel like there's a lot of good depth with them, too.
Yeah, I think all 4 of the West Coast teams in the Big Ten have a shot at finishing in the upper half of the conference this season. You mentioned UCLA. I think they'll be the best of the 4. But I look at Oregon as well, bringing back Nate Biddle. Jackson Shellstad is back as well. I think those are going to be 2 huge returnees for Dana Altman and his team. And then also USC, they're kind of a wild card to me because if you get Elijah Arenas at some point this season, I think that's going to bode well for them. But we don't know just what his availability is going to be. Obviously dealt with the car accident in the offseason, but also dealing with some surgeries that'll have him out for a few months. Should be an interesting season for the Trojans. But I think Chad Baker-Mazara, I mean, you look at him coming over to USC, obviously, having a lot of success during his career at Auburn. His college career now extends out to like 8 years? It's ridiculous how much eligibility this guy has had. So he's battle tested for sure because he's just been in college basketball for so long. That's going to be a nice veteran addition for USC. But yeah, I think all 4 are going to be very respectable in the Big Ten this season. And I think UCLA, they're not going to be down for very long, especially after last year, with Mick Cronin taking so many shots at his guys. I think this season.
And the travel.
Exactly, in the travel. I think, having a year under their belt in the Big Ten, they're going to be used to all the East Coast trips. Hopefully, cooler heads prevail in Westwood because I think this UCLA team could go at least to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, not a little bit further.
With Mick Cronin, it's always so interesting the way that he likes to call out people. He likes to call out things that he finds a little bit less than savory, and he certainly did a whole heck of a lot of that last year, as it was an up and down season for UCLA, to say the least. I do think that just year number 2 in general for these West Coast teams, because it felt like year number 1 was trial by fire going from west to east, I think that they're going to be a little bit better equipped for it, because I felt like they were at a bit more of a disadvantage, because the teams out in the Midwest, the teams out there on the East Coast, they only had to make that West Coast road trip once, maybe twice all season long, while the West Coast teams, they have to make that trip every 2 weeks. Sometimes they're doing so on back-to-back weekends, and I do think that just having a little bit more of a plan in place should allow for these teams to have a bit more success.
I agree. I think that you have to learn on the fly with all that. It's not something that you can really get used to until you actually do it the first time. And so all these schools that had to deal with as much East Coast travel as they did a year ago, you now have the experience in doing it. So now you've got a better feel of what it is that you can do on those road trips. So I think it'll bode well. It'll bode a lot better for those teams that are, in year 2 in the Big Ten, especially, teams like Cal and Stanford and ACC. It's going to be, I think, better sailing, smoother sailing, as it were, for those teams coming into this upcoming season.
Yep, no question about it. I do think that a little bit more experience is going to do these teams a lot of good. As always doing us a lot of good is Curtis Rogers joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Curtis, I always like to leave things a little bit open-ended and be able to give you the floor for some of your thoughts as well. I always ask you about teams that you're feeling good about and teams that you think have a really high upside. I want to do the opposite here. Who's the team that you think might fall short of expectations this year and that maybe is getting crowned a little bit more than they should here in the preseason and just might be a little bit disappointing?
Well, I mean, we did kind of mention them a little bit earlier, and it feels like everybody's kind of guaranteed Purdue a spot in the national title game. But how often is it that we see teams crowned in the preseason make it all the way to the national title game? Not to say that they are bad or anything. I think they're a really quality team, and they're definitely going to be challenging for the Final Four for sure. But let's pull it with the projections of the national championship. We're only in, September? I still think, and look, the Big Ten hasn't had a national champion since, 2000? So I think ultimately we still got to wait and see on a lot of these teams, as we learned last year with Gonzaga being what they were early on, not the same team as what they were in March. So should be a fun season for sure, but let's wait a little bit on the national championship talk.
Yep, absolutely. With this Purdue team, I do think that they're going to be an amazing team, bringing in Oscar Clough, who was such a good rebounder over at South Dakota State, to be able to hold it down after you could tell that they weren't the same team in the post last year without Zach Edey. That's going to be able to help them out, but certainly we see a lot of teams in the preseason be hyped up. Heck, North Carolina was the number one team in the preseason a few years ago, and they did not even make it to the NCAA tournament, but a man that always exceeds expectations, a man that never disappoints and always does an amazing job is you, Curtis. You're hard at work, except for the upcoming college basketball season, but you're doing a lot of things. You're the pre and post game host for the Seattle Mariners on the radio side of things. I know you're doing some work with the Seattle Seahawks, and hey, hockey's coming back as well, and you do some work with the Seattle Kraken and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, we're very busy this time of year. SeattleSports.com is where we go. If you want to catch your content, YouTube also is where you want to go. Like Greg said, it's just kind of where everything's meeting right now. It's the busiest time of the year. I love it. And Greg, always appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, and Curtis, he's doing such an incredible job taking a look at so many different fronts every single time he joins me. He lends great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Curtis for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways I'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. 5 more conference previews, by the way, all the Power 5 conferences. So we're getting to the big boys, and I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.